When I was a couple weeks short of my 70th birthday, I started thinking about my mother's mother, who lived to be 100, and her mother, who lived to be 102, and my father, who lived to be 90, longer than anyone we had ever heard of in his family. I began to think that maybe our generation could be the first to routinely live to be 100. When I talked about this at family dinner one night, my granddaughter, who was 5, said,
"What are you going to do for the next 30 years, Grandpa?"
Hello, I'm Dr. Janet Price.
And I'm Gregg Kaloust. And we are Oldish. And this is our podcast, Oldish.
If you're oldish or know someone who is, please join us every week for conversations amongst ourselves
And our special guests
about what it means to be oldish in the 21st century.
If you ever wonder whether you're getting old, you're oldish. What are you going to do for the next 30 minutes?
I'm Greg, and I'm Oldish.
Hi, I'm Janet, and I'm Oldish. Welcome to this episode of our podcast, Oldish, Conversations on Aging in the 21st Century. Hi, Greg.
Hi.
So we've been talking a little bit previous to recording about the state of our country, the state of the world, and have both been feeling quite discouraged, hopeless, angry. And we thought, hey, maybe there's other oldish people out there, like all of you, our dear listeners, who are feeling some of the same things. So it seemed like this might be a good topic to bring up today for this episode. And maybe, Greg, come back to it because it's probably not going to be solved tomorrow. And maybe come back in a month or two and have an update. But today is we're starting this conversation about how are we doing as oldish people in this time. So, Greg, where do you want to start?
All right. Well, first, I want to start with a short disclaimer so that people who are listening can understand a little bit. I don't think voice sounds the way that it usually does. And I'm in my third week of the flu and sinus infection. I'm taking antibiotics for it, and I'm better than I was a week ago. We did not record this a week ago because I couldn't talk. So bear with me for the next few minutes while we talk a little bit. And if I cough, I apologize in advance. You can't see me, but when I cough, I'm coughing into my elbow so that I'm not spreading germs around to the internet, which is a good thing. But other than that, I've been trying to figure this out. If I hadn't been sick the last 3 weeks, would I be feeling as bad about how things look to me as I do? How much of that is part of being sick? And people who have been listening to us for a while came out of the neutral political closet last fall around the time of the election. And I think people who are listening to us now kind of know that we're somewhat liberal in our perspectives. But I want to be clear that my feelings about what's going on in America that's got me as upset as it does right now, what's going on in America, I don't believe is because I'm a liberal. I believe it's because I'm an American. And I feel as though what I was raised and have learned through thick and thin over 74 years about America is being trashed.
I just want to jump in before you go much farther, because what you said about you wondered if you would be feeling differently right now if you weren't sick and hadn't been sick for the last few weeks and quite sick, makes me think of us as oldish, because for me, I do feel more vulnerable as I'm aging and I'm in my 70s. And I do feel fragile in some ways, and especially with everything that's going on. How is that going to impact me? How is it going to impact Social Security, Medicare? Are we going to continue to have that? So it's interesting. So I just wanted to jump in before I forgot what you were saying, that is an interesting thought as oldish people, whether we're sick in this moment or not. We're older, and everything we've known is both the good and the bad and the ugly, but that we've known over all these years, this is brand new.
It is brand new to us. When we were talking before we started to record, I always feel better when I'm talking with you because I know that we'll have a nice discussion that includes our hearts and our souls and our minds as well as just, our programming, so to speak. It always calms me down to sit and talk with you. And so while we're talking about, we're oldish now and the world is seemingly gone nuts. And so I just did a quick run through of American history in my head. And there have been very few times in American history when it wasn't scary. I'm thinking back to the scariest parts that we've learned about and lived through. The Civil War was probably much scarier to people. Well, not probably, definitely much scarier to people. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed in America because millions of people were enslaved. And, that's probably worse. World War I, that was probably worse. 50 million people died of the flu in 1918 in the middle of World War I. That was probably worse. Pretty sure the Depression kind of sucked. Pretty sure of that. And World War II, not all that pretty. We grew up during the Cold War, and there was lots of times during the Cold War when it was just, holy crap, you got to be kidding me. We lived through the civil rights movement and, did things get better or not? Who knows? But there were some really horrible things that happened during the civil rights movement and before the civil rights movement. We lived through a lot of that stuff. We lived through Nixon. We lived through the Vietnam War, as horrible as that was. I was thinking when that thought flitted through my head about those oldest people in all of those periods of time must have been like, what the hell is going on?
And not only what the hell is going on, but how do we survive? Are we going to survive? I don't know. That must have been a common theme as it is now, I think.
One of my concerns as an oldish person is myself and a lot of people that I know are dependent on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and a dependable system, all of which are currently at risk. But it's also the case that, until the 1930s, there wasn't any Social Security. And the reason that there is Social Security is American old people were left out in the cold to die. If you didn't have family to take care of you, sorry, you die. And there were millions and millions of oldish people prior to Social Security who had nothing. Wealthier people had pensions and wealth and blah, 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 but people in the lower stratas had nothing. And then I think about people talking about, well, we have to, in order to balance the budget and to make it possible for us to give tax breaks to wealthy people for whatever reason, we need to look at taking money from the big pieces of the budget, like what they call entitlements. And every time somebody says that, I get angry. My blood pressure goes up because it's not, Social Security is not an entitlement. It's something I worked for 60 years. And every paycheck that I ever got had Social Security taxes taken out of it and Medicare taxes taken out of it after the 1970s. When Medicare got in, those are entitlements. Those are things that I earned and paid for myself and other people who deserve some assistance. People who are disabled and can't work. What do you mean entitlement? They're entitled to eat. They're entitled to be able to pay rent and get medical care. Don't be cutting that stuff. There's just a lot of bleakness about what appears to me to be an on-purpose effort, a major, major effort to dismantle the United States of America as we know it and have known it for a very long time. And it's okay, fine. If you want to find waste and fraud and whatever in government services, say, okay, we're not increasing any of these things in the budget. We're going to take a good hard look at how is this money being spent? And is this how we want to spend our money? Not go in and say, we're going to cut 1,000 people out of that agency because that's a number. And then do things like go back and say, Oh, whoops. We fired people who are in charge of making sure that nuclear weapons don't go off by mistake. Oh, crap. We probably shouldn't have fired those people. We should probably hire them back again. Oh, who are they? Well, we don't know. We deleted them from the database. We don't have their phone number. We don't have their email address. We deleted them. We have no idea who they are, how we can get them back. Oh, whoops. Oh, no, we just fired the people who were trying to find a cure for or a solution to bird flu so that people could eat eggs again. Because X'd out arbitrarily waste and fraud. There must be some in there somewhere, we said. There's some waste and fraud in there somewhere. And we put non-governmental actors, people who don't work for the United States government, don't work for the United States, have never been confirmed by anything. They work for this Doge thing is an agency that doesn't exist. The president doesn't get to create agencies. The president can suggest an agency, but agencies and funding under the Constitution, that gets done by Congress. The president doesn't get to do that. So there's an attack on the Constitution, and it's scary. And I don't remember that happening. You know, all those bad parts of U.S. history that are mentioned. I remember that sometimes there were bad people in government and there were horrible rich people off on the side. But this is the first time, I think, in history that we put the horrible rich people in charge of the government.
I had this really interesting experience recently that I had the lovely opportunity to see the Broadway musical Hamilton. And I had seen it before on Disney as a movie, but this was the first time I ever saw it in person. And I felt like I wanted to say to everyone, here's a strategy for right now, which is to watch Hamilton, because the show, as most people know, is about the history of the creation of the beginnings of our country and the Declaration of Independence and who wrote these things and who were these people, and especially Alexander Hamilton. And it talks about all the things that we're dealing with right now. It talks about, it could have been written right now. It talks about that our country was created by immigrants. And it talks about how it was decided that presidents should only have a limited time to serve and not be like a British king. And there's so many things in it. So I don't know if that would be encouraging or discouraging, but it's kind of could be grounding for people that, yeah, we thought these thoughts at the very beginning. Obviously, it was very imperfect in many ways, but there was this grounding that we seem to have lost. So from everything you're saying, Greg, it makes me think about what can we do as oldish people to survive. One of the things I wonder about as being oldish myself is, what does it mean that we, all of us who are oldish, have lived a long time in this country, if we've lived in this country for our whole life or however long, and are now seeing things that seem to be crumbling, that are so unacceptable about how we treat each other, everything. I wonder, how is it different for us at this point in our lives to be experiencing this as opposed to younger people? What we do know is that there is a significant rise in anxiety, depression, hopelessness, anger / rage, worries about where we're headed and what that means for our country. So for us, what does it mean for our children? What does it mean for our grandchildren? What does it mean for us? So maybe we could spend the last little bit brainstorming together about how can we share with all of you who are listening so that we can make it through together.
I think that's a good idea to calmly go through some of that stuff. We've talked a lot in the podcast over the last few years about one of the things that happens when you're oldish is a struggle for a sense of purpose. And the purpose often that I think of is doing something. You know, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do now? One of the things that's had me flailing a little bit is I feel powerless. What can I do to make a difference here? And one thing, unfortunately, just presented itself to me, which was one of the key things that's going on that people are paying attention to these days, is what's going on with the war in Ukraine. And as you know, Janet, and I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, is one of the great blessings in my family was a number of years ago through American Friend Service. We hosted a high school student who was a young woman from Ukraine, and she became part of our family. Quite literally. I think of her as my daughter. Her younger brother fought in the war in Ukraine and is now in the United States with his wife. They're in their 30s and they're working hard to try to make things better back home. They're not trying to stop the war. Well, they would love it if the war stopped. But what they're trying to do is take care of people who are impacted by the war the way that it's been. And so I was really furious, as you heard before. I'm doing pretty well. I'm not ranting right now.
Yes, you are.
What we saw in the Oval Office the other day with Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, sitting in the Oval Office talking with President Trump and Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio, and this president of a country who was one of our allies and has been one of our allies since 1991, I think, when Ukraine broke out of the Soviet Union in 1991, we recognized them as a sovereign nation and welcomed them as allies. And so here's an ally coming to the President of the United States saying, we need help getting out of this war situation. And he was attacked by the President of the United States, who yelled in public, in front of other people, by the Vice President of the United States, who yelled at him that he was being disrespectful and not thankful enough. Not thankful enough. He actually said that in public. Yelled at him, you're not thankful enough. And the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, just sat there like a little what? He just looked pathetic, sitting there while they tried to browbeat this president of one of our allies, who, to his benefit, took it all and handed it back to a certain extent. And one of his points is he cannot accept a ceasefire that doesn't have guarantees for the security of the Ukraine during the ceasefire. And he started to talk about Putin violating ceasefires in the past, and that's when they really started to yell at him. And one of the reasons for that is that Trump has been saying, Putin under control, he listens to me and blah, blah, blah. Well, some of the violations of the ceasefire happened while Trump was president, and Trump did nothing. Okay. So it's reasonable for Zelensky to say, I'm not going to sign a ceasefire agreement if there are no guarantees that if the ceasefire gets violated, that somebody will attempt to stop the violations. They wouldn't let him say that out loud on television. They yelled over him and then threw him off. They threw him out of the White House. They told him to leave. And then, of course, the press afterwards said that he left without reporting that he was told to leave. Anyway, I was and am very upset about that, partially because it's Ukraine and I have Ukrainian family, but partially it was just horrible behavior. And in the worst times in American history, I can't imagine Abraham Lincoln not treating Robert E. Lee with respect during the course of a meeting in public. I can't imagine. And Trump was foaming at the mouth almost. It was horrible. Anyway, you were talking about find some ways to cope. And so one of my coping strategies is to say that my Ukrainian son has, as a refugee in the United States, has started a nonprofit and has been raising money and providing services to people back home in Ukraine. And those services include providing psychological services to children who have been traumatized. And just regardless of how you feel about any of this political stuff, put yourself in the position of a child or a parent of a child or a grandparent of a child or somebody who knows a child who's in a war zone. They didn't start any wars. Those children did not start wars. And so there's a lot of trauma there. Lots of people have been killed in this Ukrainian war. We don't hear about it every day anymore, but lots and lots of people have been killed. There's been lots of violence. There's been terror, cities blown up. And so anyway, so Igor's nonprofit, I'm going to put a link to the nonprofit. If anybody would like to do something peaceful to help, regardless of your political concerns or whose side you're on in the war, if you'd like to do something peaceful to help people who are unequivocally victims of the war, if you'd like to help them, there'll be a link on our website to Igor's nonprofit, and you can decide for yourselves whether that's a good opportunity for you to pitch in and help or not. But that's one of the things that I'm doing, and also telling people about it is one of the things that I'm doing to reduce my feeling of powerlessness.
Yes. And what you said, Greg, about we've talked in the past about one of the important parts of being oldish is having a sense of purpose. And so you gave us a wonderful example, or a wonderful idea and direction to turn to do some of that for Igor's nonprofit for Ukraine. Greg and I want to invite you, our listeners, to add through our website some ideas you have for supporting others during this time, including areas of protest, to protest, links. Because there's so many links and suggestions available, which is why Greg and I are not going to go through all of them right now. In fact, we would like to create a list that really is reflective of all of our thoughts, Greg, me, and our listeners, and you, our listeners. So please put up on our website, if you're interested, what you've found to create purpose for yourselves in a situation like this that we feel so powerless. Some other avenues from friends I've been talking with include, if you're in a church community, using that avenue to be with others that are like-minded for support, for solace. And often I think there are things going on in church groups that specifically provide help for getting the word out that this is not okay, it has to stop, and getting the word out that we as oldish people can be supportive to each other in these different ways. And I want to make sure to include both the reminder that there are resources out there for us as oldish people to get support, give support, feel like we have a sense of purpose, and that there's also things we can do just internally for ourselves to help us get through and help us survive, such as making sure that we get as much sleep, as good sleep, healthy sleep as we can, to eat well, to get outside every day so that you have the sun and the wind and exercise, to make sure that we each reach out to people that are important to us, to both check in with them and to have sources of support for ourselves. And then mindfulness activities, including meditation, again, going for walks, being present, using our senses to remind us of what is here right now in front of us.
Yeah, those are very good suggestions. Self-care, community care, reach out to people in your community and make sure that they are feeling okay. As Janet and I have been talking with each other, and as I talk with other people that I know, there are different angles of all of what's going on in America right now. There are different angles to upset different people. I focused on this Ukrainian thing just because how shocking it was to me to see the way that we treated the president of Ukraine. But there's other things that I'm concerned about as well. I'm just going to throw this one out there, is that I know including myself, a number of people who are severely distanced from family members and siblings, in my particular case, because of how we view things differently. But I suspect my brother is feeling anxiety about stuff, maybe from a different angle than I am, but I'm afraid to talk to him. There's things like that. So I see getting involved, and as our government is being, in my opinion, our government is being, people are trying to take our government away from us. But the government isn't just the federal government. The government goes all the way down through to your local government, regardless of whether you're on a side or which side you might be on. You have a role in that. You're a local. No matter where you live, you're local. Get involved in that. What is going on in your community, and how does that reflect all the way up through?
And we want to say also that Greg and I are aware that some of the things that we were saying today might not be something you agree with, that there are people listening right now who might have a very different view of what's happening right now in our country and what it means. We're not intentionally trying to ignore you or invalidate you. We're really being very personal today and sharing our own personal thoughts, worries about this from our perspective. So that is what's happening in this episode.
Yes. So thanks for listening to all of this, folks, and thanks for hanging in there with us. And do go and check out our website. The address is www.oldish.me, and put something in the comments. Say something to us in the comments. There's a blog there, and I'm going to write some of this in the blog as well as in the show notes. So there's a blog on our website. You can comment on the blog if you want. And hang in there. Hang in there. We are all in this together, even if we have specific disagreements with how to steer the boat, or should the boat be steered, or whatever metaphor you want to strain. We are all in this together, and let's do our best to keep each other afloat.
Yes. And until next time, find your tribe, find your purpose, write to us, and we will be checking in again soon.
Yes. Thank you, Jen. This is an extreme way to say it, but you kind of talked me off the ledge. Not by saying get off the ledge, but by just continuing to talk to me until I noticed that I wasn't on the ledge anymore. So I appreciate that.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to hear that. And thanks, Greg, for sharing your thoughts and feelings. And we will get through this together.
Yes. So, till next time.
Till next time.
Bye, Shannon.
Bye, Greg.
That's it for now. Thanks for listening. We sure had fun and learned some things. We hope you did too. You can leave comments or requests for topics or guests on this or other episodes at www.oldish.me. There's a link there too if you've wondered how you can help support our podcast. If you like what you heard today, please tell a friend and rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.